Afternoon. This is the Science Hits of 2020. And so my name is Jim Bell. I'm the moderator. I'm a nuclear engineer with closer to 50 years experience in the industry, closer to 50 years than I really would care to admit. I have with me a number of other panelists who have various contributions, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves before we begin. Bill, I believe you're next.
Okay, I'm Bill Thomason, or WA when I want to be a little more formal. My degree is in biochemistry, but I pretty soon learned that research was not my thing. So I have for quite a few years been a science and medical writer. I retired from that about a year and a half ago. And my most recent gig was helping biomedical researchers write their research articles and their grant applications. But I'm really very interested in all aspects of science, so I will not be concentrating on any particular area.
Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy S. Delmater. I'm the editor of Abyss and Apex magazine. I've been a science fiction editor and writer for 17 or more years. You're an amateur futurist to write and publish science fiction, so I do try to keep up.
Jude Marie?
Hi, I'm Jude Marie Green. Let me see, I write short science fiction, fantasy, and occasionally I write horror. And I've been published online in anthologies, in magazines, got podcast by the amazing Tina Connolly for Toast and Cake. I attended Clarion West, and I've won the Speculative Literature Foundation's Older Writers Grant, so I got some creds in the writing department. The science department, I just like to read stuff. I mean, I just was putting down a list of things. I've got like Wired magazine and Smithsonian, and I used to read Analog's science fact articles religiously, and just the ideas are brimming. They're brimful. They're just out there.
Bogi?
Hi, I'm Bogi Tokac. I'm also a science fiction writer. My first collection, The Trans-Space Octopus Congregation, came out late last year. And I also won this year the Hugo for Best Fan Writer. And in my day job, I'm a health sciences researcher. My background is in psychology and linguistics. And I do stuff related to language acquisition.
Thank you. Premi?
My name is Premi Mohammed. My background is molecular genetics, and I guess we're going to have to shorthand it to soil science. I'm a professional agrologist. I currently work for the government as a government scientist in environmental policy, and there's still a stunning amount of research that I do, but luckily it is no longer research in which I am digging a hole and not being able to get out of it. And I'm interested in all aspects of science, so I'm very excited to talk about the panel today, which is all 2020 papers. And I had to learn quite a bit of quantum physics for the novel that I published earlier this year with Solaris Books, Beneath the Rising.
Okay, so now we're going to start with our hits. Bill, I think we agreed you would lead off.
Okay, the first thing I'm going to talk about is relates to exoplanets. And it seems that there, probably everybody knows what a super Earth is. It's an exoplanet that's sort of like Earth, but it's bigger. And some of them are very, very close to their sun and therefore very, very hot. Those ones seem to be brighter than they should be. And a recent theory proposes that this is because their atmosphere is full of clouds of metals. And actually, they're hot enough that the metals evaporate. And another paper talked about one of these exoplanets, which seems to be tidally locked to its star. And the idea is that these clouds are pure iron, and when the atmosphere approaches the terminator, it rains iron.
That's pretty cool. Wendy, I think you're next.
Well, I want to talk about living in the future because I talk a lot about that on my Facebook page. I'm always posting recent science articles to let people know what is new and very interesting. And I usually will say something like, science fiction writers might want this because it's pretty awesome and different. But there's so many things that we've already thought were going to happen that have started to happen. For example, and I've got some specific examples, Space Force. How many military science fiction stories, everything from Heinlein on up, talked about something like what we have now with the Space Force? I'm not saying that it is going to be shooting any aliens next week, but we actually have one now. And so I think we're living in the future that way.
My son is actually a member of the Space Force now, Space Command.
I am seriously impressed.
Jude Marie?
Hey, first I have to unmute. Hello there. Coming at it from the science fiction writer point of view, I've been deeply fascinated about AI and how that shows up in the public consciousness. I just went and found the actual links for a few things, such as what's really got me thinking is there's Boston Dynamics had this demo video where they had this cute little robot doggy that they were showing, they were demonstrating how versatile it was by kicking it, making it get back up again, which is like, oh, wow, versatile. It can get back up again after being kicked. And all I could think of was, hey, wait for that thing to develop AI and, doggies have teeth. So.
Terminator.
Well, Terminator doggy, yeah.
Okay, Bogey?
Yeah, and I think mine would relate a bit to that because I have just been really impressed with recent progress in language modeling, and that kind of relates to artificial intelligence when it comes to language prediction and language production. For example, there's this very recent model called GPT-3, which not only has very fascinating capabilities to produce language on predetermined themes. Right now, there are also attempts to use this to produce science fiction writing. James Yu had a story out last week that was partially written in collaboration with GPT-3, and I thought that was fascinating. And he's also working on a thing with Amit Gupta, which is going to be a writing aid where if you get stuck in your fiction writing, it will help you come up with alternate continuations or things like that, kind of like an anti-writer's block thing that is powered by these types of language models behind the scenes. So I thought that was really cool.
That is cool. I would say that I've read enough science reports, though I think that some of my authors that I'm reading are already using it. Primi, I think you're next.
Oh yeah, so I, being the super cool kid, actually did a PowerPoint presentation. But I'd like to go back to what Jude Marie said, because I also like to go back to the basic science and then look at it and say, how can I turn this into a narrative? Or how could this be used in a short story or a book? So what I did was I went and dug up 3 interesting papers from this year, none of them in the current fields that I study. And if we could pull up the header slides. Yay. Science. Okay, so I'll run through the first one real quick. This is what I refer to as printing floof. This is a paper from Zhao et al. 2020. So aerogels are not new. They've been around since 1931 or so. They're mostly, everyone knows they're, you remove the solids and the liquids and you replace it with air, and it's just this amazing stuff for thermal insulation. Everyone talks it up because, oh, we're back on the first slide. Everyone talks it up because NASA uses aerogels to protect components on the Mars rovers from extreme conditions, and more boring stuff like oil and gas pipelines and to thermally insulate buildings. But what's in development is a really interesting way to 3D print aerogels, because anyone who's worked with aerogels knows they're actually really, really weak. They're really brittle. Like they've got this amazing ultra insulating capacity, but you can just take it and go like this and smush it up in your hands. So when you try to machine it to protect specific components or to be made in specific shapes, it just floof, it's gone. So what these folks did in their lab was they developed a 3D printer ink that's almost like a non-Newtonian fluid. So depending on the pressure and the viscosity, it doesn't clog the nozzles, and you can 3D print aerogels. And the way they got around that was by, and you're gonna love this, crunching up pre-existing aerogels and putting it in the ink to change its material properties. And the first thing I thought of when I thought of that was, oh, that's how you make the filling in a Kit Kat. The filling in a Kit Kat is actually crunched up Kit Kats, which begs the question of what they put in the first Kit Kat. But anyways, so
Good.
the immediate thoughts is you could print all sorts of different protective components with this aerogel, and actually, even tiny things like to protect circuit boards and transistors. And you could almost have like moving parts, because when you 3D print, of course, you don't have to machine. So the range of applications to protect items in space, to have them go further, faster, safer, is basically limitless now. And I think that could fit into a sci-fi narrative very easily. So to me, that's the so what of this research.
Absolutely.
Anything involving 3D printing being done remotely and at some distance is going to revolutionize everything. Well, for my first item, it's a solution to a mystery. I'm going to dip into, I believe, Bill's main area in biology, I suppose. There's some southern waters in the Caribbean that have long been known to divers of both indigenous peoples and sports divers, scuba divers. They're called stinging waters. And the question always was, what was causing the stinging of the swimmers? And so they knew there were jellyfish around in the waters, but they didn't touch them, but they still felt the stinging sensation. And so it turns out they did some investigation, they did some testing, and they found out that, well, I'm going to use the phrase of the investigator, they were swimming through jellyfish snot. Because here's the picture of it right now. You can go ahead and full screen that if you could. You can see the sacs, the little arrows are pointing to, of where the jellyfish are blowing things out of their mucosa into the surrounding waters to be able to stun prey. And because there were a lot of jellyfish around where these people were swimming, it was basically an area effect in the volume that they were swimming in. So that is the solution to the mystery. They've now solved the long-standing mystery of what was causing the stinging waters. So I'm done. So Bill, I believe you're up for the second round.
Okay, and
Take my picture off.
as a follow on to that, I am going to switch the order in which I had planned and talk about a solution to a different mystery. The mystery of what happened to the colonists at Roanoke, which was the first British settlement in North America. And after the founder returned to England for supplies and came back, the colonists simply were not there. Nobody knew what happened to them, but that mystery has now been solved. It turns out that the colonists moved from Roanoke to join a friendly Native American tribe on Hatteras Island. There have been archaeological investigations now that found a combination of Native American and British artifacts at the appropriate depth. And also they found that there were both round post holes like the Native American construction and square post holes like British construction. So also, I should mention that the name of the tribe was carved at the Roanoke site. So it seems pretty clear where the colonists went. What is not clear to me from the article I read is what happened to them later, because we never hear about them again.
But it still sounds like it could be a happy ending.
Yeah, it's very likely, I think, that they simply became part of the Native American tribe, but that is not proven at this point.
I just remember that it's long been the main theory that they were slaughtered as soon as their support left.
That was the theory, and it seems to have not been true. Another example of accepted history, which is not fact.
Excellent. I like this. I like that change. Wendy, I believe you're up.
Yes, let's talk about 3D printing some more, right? There's some almost holographic printing that they're able to do nowadays. It's chamber that's full of a liquid that will react to light, and they can put a hologram on that, and they can literally print something in 3D with light at this point. They're also printing organs. Now, you tell me that that isn't something where we aren't living in the future. How many science fiction novels have talked about printing organs? I'm thinking the Verkozigan saga, and Harel Verkozigan had to have a heart put together for him before he could have it transplanted in, and they were growing it. Now, we're not growing it organically. We're only doing it as a 3D print, but it is working.
Excellent.
It is working. And it's something that we're seeing right now that was predicted in a lot of science fiction.
I think those of us on this panel who are, shall we say, a little further along in years cannot wait for this to continue to improve.
No kidding. And I'm thinking of the replicator in the Star Trek series, Earl Grey, hot. Now, doing something with light and latex is maybe a precursor of that. They're making something by just saying, make it so.
You do understand that you can almost do an age thing. The younger you are, the more you want the holodeck. The older you are, the more you want the replicator.
This is true.
Jude Marie, I think you're up.
All right. Well, thank you. And, continuing on the 3D printing theme, one of the things that's actually fascinated me, and I'm starting to write a story about it, is, well, a friend told me that, he was looking into getting a new 3D printer. So I went online to check out 3D printers. And they range from a few $100s to a few $1 million. And the one that I was looking at that was a few $1 million builds a house. And basically whatever material you put in, the arm goes through and it builds the house. And it goes from the inside out. Now, the ones I've seen have been either circular or triangular. It's kind of weird shaped. And I haven't seen a completed one yet. I haven't seen one in the wild being used. I saw one that was used as a mock-up that still had other things it was working on. But the story, and that's all fairly new and cutting edge, which is awesome, because you imagine putting those materials in there and 24 hours later, because if you run it continuously, it comes right up. It doesn't take any time. Get that sucker onto a planet, remote control the instructions, or have a robot, an AI there saying, okay, we're supposed to do it like this. The inhabitants of the planet might get a little upset, but we normally don't care about that.
Oh, Halo by Charles Stross.
No.
Good example.
Do these houses have internal divisions, or are they just one room?
Internal divisions.
Wow.
Divisions, and I don't have any idea how they manage the wiring, but they do manage the plumbing. The plumbing was noted in the website.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Bogey, I think you're next.
Yeah, I would get back, I think, to the AI topic, because there's something that has been fascinating to me, and I also kind of wrote a story about it, and that is specifically the issue of adversarial inputs, which means that basically when you're processing something with a machine learning system, then what happens is it doesn't process the inputs the same way as a human would. So there are inputs that you can give to it that to a human would look perfectly normal. Like, for example, you give it pictures of cats and have it process the pictures of cats. Now, to a human, maybe all of these would look like perfectly fine pictures of cats. But maybe one of them have like little weird zigzags on it or something like that, that to you looks totally fine and you still recognize it as a cat. But your machine learning system would look at it and completely misclassify it simply because it just subtracts information from an image in a different way that a human would. And this just is very interesting to me. Because this is something like I don't want to have a big scene of like, okay, humans versus the machines or anything like that. But just that we just process information in an entirely different way. Even when we have a system that still processes information in a very human-like way, there are these weird edge cases that trip it up completely differently than a human would. And this can also make you wonder what are the adversarial inputs that you can give to a human. And I leave this as an exercise to the reader. But I wrote a story about this called Forest Spirit, which I wanted to have it with citations, but the editor said we don't run citations of research papers. So I just put the citations on my website. But it was based on like 2 preprints of computer science articles that specifically examine adversarial inputs. And I feel like since then, this has also, like this topic has also appeared more in like the popular science press and, well, in everyday life, I suppose.
Okay. I think you're up now, Premi.
Oh, actually, yeah. And I just wanted to riff really, really quickly off the 3D printing thing. There was a great paper that came out last year about one of the big limitations of 3D printing organs is that you literally can't 3D print the cells. You can't use the cells as ink. You have to seed a scaffold with cells. Last year, they developed something with hyaluronic acid as part of the ink and then stiffening it with, and I'm going to try to remember this, I think it was polygalacturanos, something like that. Bill probably knows what I'm talking about. It was a polymer. So when you stiffen the acid with the polymer and add cells, what you can actually do is print a 3D structure of cells and they don't die. So that really, really opens things up. Everything that they're printing with it now is quite small, but they should be up to organ size eventually. And the fact that they found this incredible stabilizer is so exciting. But anyways, I wanted to get on to my next one, which is great because it's about plagues. We like plagues. So 2020, hey? So there are actually plague swarms in various parts of the world. Northern Africa, South and Eastern Africa, and parts of the Mediterranean. And people aren't aware, I think in some cases, I didn't find this out until I was in like my 20s, that locusts aren't a separate species. They're actually just grasshoppers. But when they become a swarm of locusts, literally their physiology changes, their diet changes. Instead, like their caloric requirements increase hugely. They mate more, they fly more. Obviously, they need more calories if they're going to fly more. And so they just descend on people's villages and eat all their crops and ruin their lives and cause starvation and death. But so this has been a mystery for decades, actually, is what causes a grasshopper, which is just a nice little solitary guy like Jiminy Cricket, to become a locust that is like big and mean and has changed color and is going to go eat all your crops. So that's actually been found now. It is a chemical. It is 4-vinyl anisole or 4-methoxystyrene. And the way they found this out was actually very clever. So they sampled the air around these locusts and they just, let's see if I can find the actual. So this is kind of the master switch. So they eventually isolated all the compounds, tested them on grasshoppers to see if they caused this aggregation and the physiological changes. And then they did kind of what you need to do. They back synthesized the most likely suspect and tried it out again. And lo and behold, all these nice little grasshoppers turned into locusts. And then they went one step further and actually managed to find the receptor proteins and then trace that back to the odorant genes that cause grasshoppers to become receptive to these molecules. Like they take a whiff and they're like, oh, it's like Pepe Le Pew following a girl. And that means that what they did in the lab was when you knock out those genes, then you have grasshoppers that just stay grasshoppers and don't become locusts. And so not only is this really cool in terms of potential pest control, for instance, maybe baiting traps with this ultra concentrated compound and luring in all the grasshoppers and then, I don't know, relocating them or eating them or turning them into peanut butter or something. But because it's behavioral, that means that there's also potential to do things like, yeah, large scale genetic engineering in these affected areas to literally save people's lives.
Wonderful.
I'm so excited.
Okay, well, I'm being told we have about 20 minutes or so left. So I'm going to change up what I was going to do, and I'm alerting the my handler here. I want to go to first of two videos that go in a row. We were talked earlier about robots, and we have robots that do a lot of things. But one of the things we've always been wondering is, how does a cuttlefish actually do locomotion? And could a cuttlefish actually be a template for a kind of a robot of its own? So I'd like to cue in the first video of a cuttlefish swimming in the water. There's not any sound with this. This is just to show you how a cuttlefish actually works. Notice that it doesn't have fins as in the standard sense, nor does it have a propeller for that matter, or legs. So then they decided, can we build a robot that can do this, and how useful would that robot be in terms of locomotion? So now I'll show the second video, and you can judge for yourself how efficient or effective the locomotion is. I'm hoping this works.
Could see the previous one, but not this one.
I'm not seeing a video here for my NASFiC AV support people.
He says,
Well, they had it the other day. Well, there are 4 videos, and that's the second one of the Cuttlefish Robot. Oh, well, that did not work unless he's got it now. We can always stare at the cuttlefish. There it is.
Yes.
ah,
So it does fine on ice. It does fine on snow. It does fine on normal. And does it still swim? Yes, it swims. It swims very well. So I give you the Cuttlefish Robot. So Bill, I think we're back to you. Thank you.
Okay. Here is something something weird. At least I think it is. Would you believe that hot water can freeze faster than cold water? Well, under certain circumstances, it can. And the question is, why? Why would it do this? And the answer, it turns out, from recent simulations, is that making ice depends on the water molecules rearranging themselves in a somewhat strange way, because which is why ice, unlike almost any other solid material, is lighter than liquid water. So you have to rearrange the molecules to get them to make ice. And of course, in hot water, the molecules are moving faster. So the fact that they're moving faster means it makes it easier and faster for them to actually get into the right alignment to form the ice structure. And under the right circumstances, hot water freezes faster than cold water.
That's remarkable. My father used to tell me that, and I didn't believe him. Sorry, Dad. Wendy?
let's talk about energy, since he was talking about the energy and how it would change things with ice and hot water and no in-between state. There are new discoveries where they've actually found a chemical way to turn bricks into electrical storage units, which has some tremendous possible applications for smart buildings, say you have windows with the spray on clear coat, the smart window, tell it what to do, whether to darken or not. That's also something that's come out recently. And then you've got your solar cells, or maybe a wind turbine up on the roof. And that energy is stored in the bricks of the building, which are the exterior, like a battery. These are all things science fiction writers can be writing about, and they'd better hurry up because within 10 or 15 years, all this is actually going to be happening.
More than one science fiction writer has said that it's hard to keep ahead of science when they write
It
new
is.
term.
It is. You have to just, sometimes it has to become an alternative universe when people read it a few years later.
I can't help but add, since you're in an energy field, that as an energy career engineer, I fear stored energy around me.
So do I.
Okay, so just understand that. You know,
Just
Tesla
give us
didn't
some
want me to have-
thorium reactors and I'll be perfectly happy.
Yeah, okay, moving on from that. Jean Marie.
Yeah, you know, it is really hard to keep track of to keep up with the science. I wrote a story once about ARFIDs and drones killing people from above, and it's kind of like every day now. It's gotten so people just accept it. So anyway, this is actually from last year, but I found it fascinating. I was looking for the urban legend that every time we actually develop a self-cognizant AI, it commits suicide, which is actually an urban legend. I found out that there is in development, and they've actually used it, I think it said Australia in the article, where you put speech through analysis with an AI and they can detect suicidal patterns. They can detect medical suicidal patterns, and they can detect emotional suicidal patterns.
Wow.
And I don't know what they're going to do with that information, but it is an absolutely fascinating area. And somebody was mentioning earlier, I think it was Bogie was talking about language modulation. Yeah, I mean, we know that the AI systems we're developing now are keyed to our language anyway. So I'm wondering how they get there from here.
Bogie?
Yeah. Mine is a little bit related. I wanted to say something about something specifically medical, and also when it comes to progress of science, because I think that a lot of people assume that there are two things that hold true of medicine. One is that all the major health conditions have been discovered at this point, and the other assumption that people have that the more common health conditions or just variations are more investigated and more researched. And I meet these assumptions a lot in my day job, and they're not really true. So first of all, I'm going to bring two examples for this. So first of all, one of the most common forms of atypical development in childhood is developmental language disorder, when a child doesn't have necessarily anything else beyond issues with producing a language or comprehending language. And this is a quite common thing. But I just saw a paper last month that there's an order of magnitude less research on this topic than much more rare conditions or variations. And this has apparently been true for at least 10 years, and it still hasn't changed. So there's that something can be very common and not necessarily investigated. And the second point is about whether we have actually discovered all the common health conditions. And here, a chronic illness is very interesting. It's called mast cell activation syndrome, which sounds kind of fascinating and science fictional, but this is a totally real condition. It's an immunological condition where in your cells, mast cells, which are part of the immune system, they react much, they have a kind of hyperactivity, and they activate even when they don't necessarily need to. And this can cause a really wide range of symptoms that can be very different. Like somebody can have a rash, flushing, rapid heartbeat, nausea, all sorts of symptoms. And this meant that it was very hard to discover, because the patients just had, oh, okay, I have this, and this kind of symptom, but they're kind of like generic systemic symptoms. Some inflammation, some nausea, some this and that, their joints hurt. And this disorder was first discovered less than 20 years ago, and the diagnostic criteria were finalized maybe 10 years ago, but this is a really active area of research. And previously, people would just say, oh, okay, you have these symptoms. Oh, you're just like imagining that you're sick. It cannot really be that we can't figure out what's going on with you. But then people found out that this has a very specific cause and also very specific treatment. You just need to make the mast cells less reactive, which you can do with antihistamines and various other things that modulate how much these cells activate. And most of these treatments are like over the counter, not all of them, but like, and this was discovered only relatively recently. So this was just an illustration that we kind of imagine science to be like omniscience sometimes, but even like relatively not super rare conditions are still being discovered in medicine all the time.
Remy, I think you're up.
Oh, last one. I thought I'd end on kind of a positive note because this is a fun little one. So I think people get the idea that scientists would really, really like to stick wires in you and zap your brain with electricity. We actually do, like a lot. And I'm so sorry about that. But this is a cool story because it's not about language recall, and it's not about people maybe accidentally remembering something and having that show up in the study. So they took native English speakers who were not bilingual in any other language, and they tested them on learning the tones of Mandarin Chinese, which of course is a diatonic scale language. And so these are things that you have to be taught, and therefore they're able to test learning rather than memory. And they found that using a little external device on the ear, it almost looks like an earbud, and stimulating the vagus nerve with electric pulses at a very low voltage, they weren't actually zapping people square in the brain. They got on average 13 and up to about 20% increase in language learning. That is the uptake of these tones. And I thought that was just so incredible because that is something we see in sci-fi a lot. That is, oh, I've got a learning implant. I just learned something, you know, I changed out the chip in my implant or whatever, blah, blah, blah. So they're looking at this at the moment, in particular for people that have traumatic brain injury, but eventually the applications should be for everyone because 13 to 20% is actually an enormous number. When you look at that, that's a huge, huge, huge amount of learning if you can get that through an electrical pulse instead of spending more time or more effort on the learning. So I really hope to see more of that, I think, in stories in the future because it's happening now.
That is cool. I could have used something like that because I could never do languages. Math, I had no problem with. Languages, I just couldn't do it. Well, I guess we're probably on my last item as well. I'm going to shift my order. I'm going to use the whale shark. The whale shark, they don't know how long they live. If you look them up on the web, you'll find estimates of 100 to 150 years. But the truth is, nobody's really sure. They grow to about 60 feet long. And the specimens that are recovered before various endangered species rules came in to try to save them, ever since then, the ones that they've been capturing are not 60 feet long. So in fact, I hope they don't capture any that are 60 feet long. But they didn't know how old they were. In fact, they didn't even know how fast they grew or how long it was before they became reproductively mature. In fact, they found that they had rings in their bone structures, especially the vertebrae, and they were counting the rings just like you count it in certain insects and in trees and things of that sort. But they didn't know how many rings there were per year because unlike trees the whale sharks can move great distances. They might actually have 2 summers and have 2 growths per year. In fact, one of the largest specimens was recovered, was a little over 10 meters long, was estimated, had 42 rings. So the examiner, the investigator thought that that was 21 years based on his own guess. But well, this is where my industry comes in. It turns out the Bikini Atoll and the various tests that were done that put all the radiation to the atmosphere into the 50s also had the side effect of giving all long-lived animals a certain amount of carbon-14 and other isotopes in their long tissue. And it changes by year. So you have a very long-lived animal. You can go back and compare the various radioisotope depositions of the various vertebrae with other animals known to live contemporaneous to various periods, and you could actually figure out how long they've lived. And it turns out that no, they are 1 ring per year. So that whale shark that he thought was 21 years old was actually 42. Now, however, they still don't know how long whale sharks live, because the biggest one so far has been 50 years. So maybe we'll figure out if they ever find a stranded adult, fully sized one, they'll figure out how long whale sharks live. But so far, we're still just guessing. Wendy, this probably is your last one.
Yes, probably is. I'm going to go medical here. I don't know if you're aware of it, but they have recently developed artificial skin that has nerve ending feelings. Shades of data and the brain. He could literally feel something through the skin. This is an artificial skin that they can build and use for somebody who has had perhaps 3rd-degree burns. Instead of skin grafts, they can put this on there and there'll be a lot less suffering. So it's still in the developmental phase, but it's pretty darn awesome. And there's a lot of other things that are going on that are going to stop suffering, like the fact that they've come up with artificial meat, which is something that science fiction writers have been talking about forever, and it's starting to become a reality. Just go to Burger King and get the Impossible Burger. I don't know how good it is, but then I don't go to Burger King. I just know they have one.
There was a lady science fiction writer who wrote exactly what you're saying back right around shortly after World War I. She's the first one I know of that did that. The name is not coming to my mind.
Well, I know that Lois McMaster-Bujold talked about vat-grown meat in the Vorkosigan series, so that's the one that more people would probably be familiar with, but she's not the only one. It's just something we've assumed would happen eventually, and about time.
It's coming. Jude, Marie, you think you're next?
Thank you for that. Hey, I'm going to go on to a slightly more frivolous side over here. I love to watch these movies, these science fiction robot movies. And the ones that I've seen recently, AI, artificial intelligence, Ex Machina, which is wonderful in its own way, but not where I'm going here. I, Robot, the original Isaac Asimov's vision with R. Daniel Oliva and his 3 laws of robotics. But I got to tell you, the one that I like best, that I think is actually closest to being a robot rather than a human slave, is Robot and Frank. It's this lovely movie starring Frank Langella and a little robot. And it basically portrays robots and the future. There's a library takeover or takedown. Frank Langella used to be a mastermind criminal. And that's kind of where this whole movie leads to. It's kind of awesome. If you get a chance to watch it, Robot and Frank.
Bill, I think I skipped you. I didn't mean to.
Okay, yes. The Siberian woolly rhinoceros went extinct about 13 or 14,000 years ago. And the tendency has been to say that must have been because of human hunters. But the fact is that if you follow the archaeology, humans and the woolly rhinoceros had coexisted for more than 10,000 years. So the current theory now is that the woolly rhinoceros essentially went extinct because of climate change. It was adapted to a very cold climate, and the climate got warmer and wetter, and the amount of land that the woolly rhinoceros was adapted to shrank and shrank. it had once got spread all through Europe and Northern Asia, and then it ended up only in Siberia. And eventually, of course, humans may have hunted it as well, but it was fundamentally the climate change and the end of its habitat that killed it off. And one interesting thing is that they have recently discovered a fossil of a 14,000-year-old puppy. It's not clear whether this is a dog puppy or a wolf puppy, but in any case, it's a puppy from 14,000 years ago, and it had a woolly rhinoceros meat in its stomach. This must have been one of the relatively last woolly rhinoceroses.
That it's always in the last place you look.
Yeah, right.
Bogey, I think you're back on track for you next. Yeah, I was also thinking about something that can also be useful for fantasy writers, not just science fiction writers. And this is a bit far from my field, but genetics has been very interesting when it comes to information about history, and specifically in Hungarian history, there was this debate, where did the ancient Hungarians come from and what they were like? And one theory was that they were like Finnish people because their language is similar to that. And the other theory is that they were more like Turkic peoples of Central Asia because their culture was similar to that. So people couldn't really decide. Now there have been genetic studies of people, ancient Hungarian graves were investigated with these methods, and they found that ancient Hungarians were ethnically diverse, which is in keeping with also what we know, that they were a political alliance of different groups. I just thought that was interesting, and this similar information can probably be gleaned by the prehistory of a bunch of other peoples as well.
Primi, do you have another one, or are you done?
No, I'm done. I would just like to say, though, that I slush for Escape Pod, which is a sci-fi short story venue, and we really, really love to see short stories that are based on real-world science, and we're opening back up again on September 1st, so please, everybody, write short stories and submit.
Okay, I want to thank everybody, my panelists, and I want to give a shout out to one of our people in the chat room, to David Demerol, who points out that there's a very interesting application in steam railway preservation, because sometimes it's cheaper to find the original smoke box door and other parts of that sort, the original parts, laser scan it, and then fill in all the rusted away stuff using expensive 3D printer, rather than it is to try to track down engineering diagrams and filling in parts from those. I didn't know that. I'm glad to learn it. And with that, I want to thank my panelists again, and thank anyone here, and thanks for the NASFiC staff, support staff, for your help. And I think we're done. Thank you very much.
All right, yes. Thanks to all the panelists.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jim.
And at this point, you can go to Olentangy even and continue all of your discussions. And the bumper will be up.